My girlfriend said I was overreacting when she let her ex crash at her apartment. So I packed my bags and left her a note that made her break down crying. My girlfriend Sophie, 28, and I, Mark, 30, have been dating 2 years and living together for 9 months. For most of that time, things were fine, messy like every relationship, but fine. We shared groceries, argued about whose turn it was to mow the lawn, celebrated small wins. I trusted her. I didn't have much reason not to. A month ago, she told me her ex, Ethan, was between places. He'd split up with his girlfriend, his roommate bailed, and he was totally stuck. Sophie asked if she could let him crash on our couch for a week or two while he sorted things. She framed it as neighborly and practical. He'd be careful. He'd stay out of the way. She'd make sure he left when a place opened. I told her I wasn't thrilled about it. Couch surfers are one thing, but Sophie has history with Ethan, and I was nervous about boundaries. She smiled and said I was being dramatic, that we should trust people, and that she'd handle it. She promised rules. Ethan wouldn't have keys. He wouldn't stay more than the agreed time. He wouldn't be in the apartment late when I was around. I believed her because she'd always been blunt and practical about these things. For 2 days, Ethan kept to himself like a ghost. On night 3, he crashed after Sophie said he'd had a rough day. He fell asleep on the couch, and Sophie did too. Okay, that happens. But the little things kept piling up. He started leaving his shirt in the bathroom, eating food out of our fridge without asking, lingering after Sophie left for work. He'd show up to pick something up and end up staying in the apartment for hours. Sophie brushed it off when I brought it up. She called me paranoid and told me not to make issues out of kindness. She assured me the situation would be temporary. Then I found the texts. It was late. I was up because sleep had fled me, and my phone buzzed. A screenshot Sophie's friend had sent asking if everything was okay because Sophie had been acting off. I shouldn't have looked at Sophie's phone. We don't snoop, but I've always had access to our shared family calendar and a couple of apps. And in a moment of weakness, I unlocked her phone to check the calendar and saw a message preview from Ethan that didn't look friendly or practical. It was flirty. I pulled the phone out of guilt and read the thread. There were messages where Sophie called him babe and don't be silly, and where Ethan sent photos that were not look at this weird thing on the bus photos. Not all of it was explicit, but it was intimate. There were messages from Sophie at 3 a.m. where she wrote things like, miss you, and you always know what to say. There were arrangements to meet in the building when she said she was going to the store. I felt like someone had shoved a hand between me and the trust I'd been holding. I confronted her the next morning in the kitchen. I didn't shout. I held the phone on the table and said, is this what's happening? She took one look and said, at first, that I was misreading things, that I was overreacting. She twisted the timeline and said Ethan had been a comfort after a shock at work, that it was all innocent. When I kept pushing, she got angry. You don't get to control who I help, she said. And then she accused me of invading her privacy. At that point, I realized 2 things. 1, Sophie would defend Ethan and her choices reflexively, and she'd make me seem like the bad guy. 2, she would gaslight the version of events to anyone who asked. I was terrified that if I launched into a big argument in front of friends, or if I tried to prove anything by waving a phone, she'd frame it as me attacking someone who was down on his luck and me being jealous. So I did the thing I regret, and at the same time, the thing I needed to do. I packed a bag, clothes, toothbrush, a few shirts, my laptop, the things I needed. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter where Sophie would find it coming home from work. I did not post anything online. I did not shout in the hallway or call her friends. I packed and walked out. The note said, plainly and without flourish, what I'd seen. I included dates and times and copied a few exact message snippets into the note, with the screenshots clipped and placed under the paper so she couldn't pretend I was making it up. I told her I'd try to bring it up calmly, but she'd call me controlling and refuse to set boundaries. I said I was leaving to give myself space and to let her think about whether her actions fit the life we'd promised each other. I also wrote one line that I'll never forget writing. If you want to explain to anyone what happened, be honest. If you tell a story where I'm the aggressor, you should know I kept everything. Timestamps, messages, and the truth. That line was meant to put the decision back with her. Tell the truth or make up a story. Either way, I wouldn't be in the apartment while she chose. She read it in the doorway when she came home. She went white, and then the color collapsed from her face like something leaking out. She sat down on the floor and folded her hands as if she were steadying herself, and the sound she made, a sob that was part anger and part real grief, made me feel sick and steady at the same time. She called a few friends, and in that small circle she sobbed. I watched from the stair landing while she talked. She held a paper half crumpled in her hands, and I watched her shift between admitting things and denying things. At one point, she said, I love you, Mark, into the phone, and then, whispering to the friend on the line, she said, he snooped. He's a stalker. I walked away. I'd seen enough. Update, 3 days later. Sophie texted me a long message asking me to come back and talk, to give her the chance to explain, to tell the full story. She said she was embarrassed and scared, and that she'd been confused about Ethan's attention, that she hadn't wanted anything to happen, but she'd liked the feeling of being wanted. Her friends called me, and a few of them asked to know the whole thing. One of them, Dana, had been Sophie's closest friend since college, and we'd always gotten along. Dana asked if she could see the screenshots. I told her what I had and offered to show the evidence if Sophie approved it. Dana said she would talk to Sophie and try to be a neutral third party. Sophie invited me over that night. She had her phone face down on the counter. She'd already texted Ethan to leave, and she told me he'd already found a short-term room at Friends. She cried and said she'd made mistakes. I sat at the kitchen table, and she handed me a folded paper, a note she'd written to Ethan that said she was sorry and that they shouldn't text anymore. It could have been real remorse. It could have been damage control. I wanted to believe her. We talked for a long time. I asked honest questions. Did you ever kiss him again? Did you ever sleep near him? She said no to both, and then, after a beat, said she'd made out with him once 2 weeks ago when they bumped into each other coming out of a bar. She said it meant nothing and that she felt terrible. The moment she said it, I felt something inside me go hard and cold. The lying was worse than the act because she'd spent days hiding it and acting as if everything was innocent. Dana sat with us for part of the conversation and then asked Sophie flat out, in a way that made her look at her own words, why she'd told people I was controlling instead of telling the truth. Sophie's face went red, then pale, then tearful in a different way. Dana, who's not one for theatrics, put her hand on Sophie's shoulder and said, "You hurt him, and then you explained your embarrassment away with a story that harms him. That's not fragile. That's selfish." Sophie cried in front of her friend until her shoulders shook. But the sobbing wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning of reckoning. She texted Ethan and asked him to come over so she could return a jacket he'd left. He came. When he left the apartment 5 minutes later, he looked at me in passing and gave a small nod that said, "This is getting real." I didn't speak to him. I'm not proud of that nod-burning sensation I got, like an answer I hadn't wanted. By the end of that night, we were both exhausted. Sophie asked for time to rebuild trust and agreed to couples counseling. I slept in my own place that night, the couch of my sister's, because I couldn't face our bed. It felt like the only honest thing to do. Update, 6 weeks later. We tried counseling for about a month. The counselor was good at making us slow down and articulate things without the gaslighting that had become our default. Sophie admitted she'd been lonely and had made a series of selfish choices. She admitted the makeout, both the flirting and the texts, and that yes, she'd sometimes frame things to make me look controlling when she was embarrassed. She cried and told the counselor she was ashamed. Here's the thing, she was genuinely ashamed in private, but public shame is different. A couple of Sophie's mutual friends had already heard an embellished version blaming me, reversing that Ripple is messy. Dana spoke to a few people and laid the screenshots on the table. Not everyone believed her, but most did. The friction that followed wasn't dramatic in the movie sense. It was a series of quiet withdrawals, unanswered texts, and a couple of group chats where people stopped tagging me. Sophie and I tried to rebuild slowly. She cut contact with Ethan entirely and blocked him across platforms. She rearranged how she spent time with friends who had been close to him and cut down on nights out where she knew she'd run into him. She set alarms to text me when plans changed. Tiny, awkward, daily efforts. But I couldn't stop replaying the early nights. I look at her phone and feel sick. She said the same about me. She felt watched, which made her resentful. Trust didn't snap back. It returned piecemeal, like a cracked window replaced one pane at a time. We kept going because we both said the relationship mattered. There were good days, dinners where we laughed about nothing, small reconciliations where she'd show up without being asked, a Sunday where she cooked a ridiculous omelet that was somehow both burnt and delicious. There were rotten days too. A time she didn't pick up when I needed her after a bad doctor's appointment. And the old narrative of me being the jealous boyfriend crept into my family WhatsApp. I felt trapped between wanting to make it work and wanting not to be the person who sat around waiting for a partner to prove themselves again. Final update, 5 months later. 5 months after I left with a bag and a note. We're at a place that's honest, I think. Sophie and I are still together, but we are not the couple we were. We missed a lot of trust and a lot of easy fate. There were casualties. A few friends stopped inviting us to things. My sister still gives me the side eye sometimes. Sophie's old roommate unfollowed me online. Those things sting, but they're not the point. The dramatic line in the note, the one about be honest or don't tell a story where I'm the villain, did its work. Sophie had to face the truth with people she liked. She sobbed in front of them, but she also said the truth out loud to people who mattered. That pivot mattered more than the theatrics of my leaving. People saw her own admission and that tilted things. We're in couples therapy on a regular schedule, and we keep a small, practical contract between us. Full transparency on living arrangements when non-household members crash here. Phone privacy boundaries that are agreed on. No midnight browsing someone else's messages without permission. And a check-in Sunday where we say the hard thing before it grows into resentment. She meets me halfway on things like mutual access to any shared logging app we use, and I meet her halfway by not rifling through phones emotionally. It's ugly and adult and not poetic, but it's real. Did I go about it the right way? Probably not. Packing a bag and leaving a note was dramatic and hurtful, and I did it because I wanted to create a situation where she had to choose an honest path. I understand being called manipulative for that, and I accept the charge. But I also know what it felt like to find the messages and have my concerns written off as me being dramatic. I can say this, leaving forced Sophie to stop framing me as the villain when she needed to explain things. She broke down to friends and then told them publicly what she'd done. That moment of honesty made it possible to rebuild. It didn't magically fix anything. Months of hard work followed, but it changed the chart we were on. If I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, I'd do the hard conversation sooner, and I'd try mediation or counseling before the dramatic exit. But when you're in the thick of being dismissed and your voice is minimized, your choices are messy and imperfect. I chose one messy option, and it pushed both of us into an uncomfortable truth. I know this reads like a cliff at the end of a short story, but the real life after is a long, quiet grind, and some days it's better than others.